as also in the general medical problems. Okay, hypertension and diabetes mainly. Over to Dr. Shambu.
Okay. So thank you, sir. So it is really honored to sit in the same dais, though it is an web dais, with Professor Shantanu Kumar Tripathi, who is an eminent clinical pharmacologist in the country, and with Dr. Shundeep Gupta, who is a very renowned neurosurgeon in the city of Kolkata. So my topic of discussion today is about the prescription reconciliation in patients who have benign prostatic hyperplasia and whether there is some role of clinical pharmacology. So we'll discuss some cases, real life cases, and try to understand the need of at least using clinical pharmacological principles while managing benign hyperplasia of prostate patients. So this is a 76-year male, type 2 diabetes with PHP, with hypertension and CKD. Now we can see the medication list. The patient is on glyclazide, glargine, linagliptin, cilnidipine once daily, telmisartan, metolazone, prazosin, nebivolol, atorvastatin, and clopidogrel. This particular patient had visited neurosurgery OPD for management of PHP, and there he was prescribed with this fixed dose combination of sildosin and dutasteride, and it was initiated after 3 days. The old man had suffered a fall while going to bathroom at night and landed up with a neck femur fracture. So this is the case, and this case actually spoke us the need of clinical pharmacological reconciliation when a patient is taking multiple drugs. And what is clinical pharmacological reconciliation? Number one, we should choose drug. We should check drugs the patient is taking, whether they are for any valid clinical indication or not. So there should be a clear therapeutic goal and evidence-based therapy, evidence-based practice for each prescribed drugs. Also need to see the pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic rationale for prescribing drugs, along with the right dosage regimen need to be checked. When there is some polypharmacy, what is polypharmacy? Though there are different definitions available for polypharmacy, but in general, we define polypharmacy as, in case of an ambulatory patient, if the patient is taking 3 or more drugs, so more than 2 medicine for one indication, one disease, then we can call it or define it as polypharmacy. Obviously, there is some exceptions like tuberculosis, because in tuberculosis, the disease itself requires 4 drugs. So that is an exception, but in general, one disease, if it is more than 2 drugs, then we can call it as polypharmacy. So we need to adjust the prescription as much as possible below 3 drugs, 2 or 1 drugs, like that. Another important goal for clinical pharmacology reconciliation is to improve adherence, to check the patient safety issues, different possible adverse drug reactions or adverse drug-drug interactions, whether the therapeutics have some adverse impact on quality of life And most importantly, we need to address the medication errors, and where the chance of errors are maximum at the time of transition of care related issue. So maybe the patient was in home, then needs some hospital admission. So in hospital also there are different category of wards. Initially the patient admitted in critical care unit, then the patient when stabilized come to HDU, then the general ward. So in every state there is a possible errors due to this transition of care related issue. So we need to be very careful, and when a patient is going to multiple super specialists, again there is a chance, because it is not always possible for patient to recall every drug he or she is taking. So often he missed to name one drug, and particular super specialist is unable to know about that drug the patient is taking. And for that, the patient will end up with some serious adverse drug-drug interactions. And these are a few important principles of clinical pharmacology care. Number one, we need to treat adverse drug reactions. We need to avoid the prescribing cascade. And for that, to prevent adverse drug reaction, it is very important, specifically while seeing our geriatric patient, we should start low, go slow, but yes, obviously we have to go. There should be some patient specific changes. Maybe the patient has compromised renal and hepatic function. We need to individualize the intervention for specific cases. Need of deprescribing. We need to stop any drug that without known benefit, and we need to discontinue a drug with actual or potential adverse effect. And sometimes substitution within class, that also can eliminate adverse drug interactions and adverse drug reactions. So this flow chart is very important to understand the need of medication reconciliation and where that transition of care related medication errors can happen. So here you can see from home to admission to a healthcare facility that requires an admission reconciliation. We should have a best possible medication history, and that can be from interviewing the patient and family. The most important is to check the medication by vials or strips, to check that directly, or sometimes going through the list. Here it is not possible because we don't have this database, government medication database, which is present in US, UK, but most probably a very recent decision taken by our national central government may emphasize the need of this database. The previous patient health records, previous hospital admission history, these are the important source of medication information. Then when entering into the healthcare facility, it is very important to check the ongoing medications in the hospitals, and we need to adjust them with the home medications. Even the internal transfer from ICCU to HDU to general ward, that is very crucial, and we need to be very vigilant. And after that, the second time when the reconciliations need to be done carefully, that during the time of discharge, And when the decision to discharge happens, we need to again plan for a best possible medication discharge. And for that, we need reconciled discharge prescriptions, the physician discharge summary, and patient medication schedule. And we need to cautiously taking care of the ongoing medications before admission, and the information should be percolated to the patient carefully, otherwise there will be some unnecessary duplications. So in this case, this patient, when visited to us, we had done the cardiac autonomic neuropathy screening. So this is the finding we can find. There is a gross or deranged parasympathetic function, and also the sympathetic function deranged. You can see from this slide, there is postural. I am sorry, it was little like no postural hypotension, but we can see from here, there is definitely a postural hypotension. This is I can say a mistake from printing. So the patient suffered from postural hypotension. So what we did here, so what was the problem in that particular patient? So he was advised with this fixed dose combination of sildosin and budesonide. We all know that sildosin is itself not cause that much postural hypotension, but this particular patient is also taking another alpha-1 blocker, that is prazosin, and in the medication list it was missed, and there is a duplication of alpha-1 blockers that happened. The patient took prazosin along with this sildosin, which aggravated the postural hypotension, and the patient suffered fall. So we had done this reconciliation to this particular patient. The sildenafil, which was 20 milligram initially, it was we had prescribed 10 milligram twice daily. And why we had prescribed, I am just showing this ABPM report. The patient was also done this ambulatory blood pressure monitoring, and you can see generally the patient is taking the sildenafil at night at around 10 p.m. like that, and that is why there is a beautiful nocturnal dipping. But what happened in the evening time, when we all know the half-life of sildenafil is at around 2 to 4 hours. So in the trough concentration of sildenafil, there is a rise in blood pressure, and that is why, as we had divided the sildenafil 10 milligram twice daily, it takes care of that particular action of that trough action, and there is a 24-hour blood pressure reduction. Now coming to, while talking about BHP management, this is very important to know about the classification subgroups of alpha-1 receptor, and it is very important to note that in case of vessels, because when we are considering the side effect, the adverse effect of alpha-1 blocker, the vessel is an important part, and it is due to that alpha-1 blocking of this prazosin or other alpha-1 blockers, it causes vasodilation, and that is responsible for blood pressure reduction, and also it gives benefit in terms of hypertension management, but also it causes postural hypotension due to that vasodilation. Now if we can see that alpha-1b subtype, this alpha-1b subtype is very important, because this is the, we can say, the principal receptor which modulates the arteries. It influences alpha-1 and alpha-1b of arteries also. So both subtype, large caliber and small caliber vessels are contracted if we stimulate the alpha-1b receptor. So if a drug which can block this alpha-1b receptor, it causes profound vasodilation. Whereas the alpha-1a, now you just see here the genitourinary system, in the bladder, in the prostate, the alpha-1a has the dominant role in contraction. And whereas the alpha-1b does not have a clear-cut role or very lower level of transcripts there. So if we can block selectively the alpha-1a, that will actually gives benefits in BHP patient, and it will not cost us in terms of producing postural hypotension. So this is very important diagram we can see, and I request all of you to go through this article published in the British Journal of Pharmacology in 2019. This is a very interesting article, and this article gives us the idea why we should go more specific to this alpha-1a subtype of alpha receptors, alpha-1 receptors, for getting benefits in terms of symptoms reduction in BHP patient. And this is again a big diagram where you can see the prazosin. Prazosin has the almost equal effect, you can see, in the alpha-1d, alpha-1a and alpha-1b receptor. And that is why, though prazosin can be good for BHP patient, but it will produce postural hypotension due to the selectivity to the vessels also of that alpha B. Now if we go by the different newer generations alpha-1 blocker, there we will found that the terazosin and doxazosin, they are also non-subtype selective. So they have overall equal alpha-1a, alpha-1d and alpha-1b effect. Alfuzosin also has a non-subtype selective action, but it is little bit better than that prazosin, and as Dr. Gupta has beautifully mentioned, it has lesser effect on the erectile function. But if we go by the tamsulosin and other drugs, drugs like sildosin, they are more selective to alpha-1a type subtype and alpha-1b subtype. Their selectivity to alpha-1b is much less. So tamsulosin and sildosin, they are more selective to alpha-1a and alpha-1d, and that is why sometimes it may produce abnormality in erectile function and ejaculation. There is abnormal ejaculation known as retrograde ejaculation with this tamsulosin. But they are safe in terms of, or relative safe in terms of development of postural hypotension. So there are three subtypes of alpha receptors, as already we had discussed: alpha-1a, alpha-1b and alpha-1d. But 70% of the subtypes in the prostate being alpha-1a. And what we had discussed, that alpha-1b located primarily in the peripheral vasculature, and they are generally responsible for the blood pressure regulation. So if we block alpha-1b, then it will produce that vasodilation and drop in the blood pressure. There is very little effect on benign prostatic hyperplasia patient with that alpha-1b. So all available alpha antagonists, they have activity at all receptors. But tamsulosin and sildosin, they are semi-selective for that alpha 1A subtype. And tamsulosin is sometimes more selective for all subtypes, but that ratio of selectivity for the alpha 1A subtype to alpha 1B or alpha 1B is greater for sildosin than tamsulosin. But here it is important to note that no clinical studies till date had suggested that sildosin is better than tamsulosin, like that. No, that much robust clinical trials suggest that. And the non-inferiority trial was done with sildosin and tamsulosin when sildosin came into the market. But one thing is important to mention in that the dose of tamsulosin used in that particular trial was little bit in half dose. That means sildosin was compared with tamsulosin half dose, that is 0.2 milligram, and it shows equivalent thing. So what is important for our first case, that we need to check the patient's ongoing medication. The medication list is very important, and we will found we can found in from that list that there is a duplication. The patient was already on prazosin. On top of that, he was prescribed with another alpha 1 blocker, that is sildosin, and that causes that postural hypotension and fall. Now another case, a 62-year male type 2 diabetic and hypertensive, need cataract surgery, and this is the medication history. Patient is on vildagliptin, metformin twice daily, atorvastatin 20 milligram once daily, telmisartan 40 milligram once daily. Well controlled blood pressure and glycemic status. Now he had visited to neurosurgeon for BHP, benign hyperplasia of prostate is there. So the physician referred that patient to neurosurgeon. So what will be your advice here from the perspective of neurosurgeon and from the perspective of physician? What we should know while sending a patient who had developed cataract and is going to surgery? So what should be our thinking or what are the rationale behind that thinking? So this is an important chart. This chart is always hammered in our brain from our MBBS days, second year. So in the bladder, the sympathetic effect is if we stimulate that, bladder causes the detrusor muscle will be relaxed, and that is by that beta 2 receptor, and the parasympathetic effect is contraction by the stimulation of M3 receptor. In the sphincter, that sphincter causes contraction due to alpha 1 stimulation and relaxation by the parasympathetic effect by M3 stimulation. Now, why I am also taking care of this area pupil and ciliary muscle, that is I am going to discuss in little bit details. That is in sympathetic effect that causes pupil to dilate due to that alpha 1 stimulation, and parasympathetic effect we know it causes constriction by the M3 stimulation. And in the ciliary muscle, if there is the beta stimulation, specifically the beta 2 stimulation, that causes relaxation, and parasympathetic effect is contraction due to that M3 receptor stimulation. Now coming to eye first. So this is the normal eye. The muscarinic stimulation happened. So what will be done? In the sphincter muscle, there is the M3 receptor, and the sphincter muscle will be contracted. And if there is sphincter muscle is contracted, so what happens? There will be meiosis. And when there will be a adrenergic stimulation, the alpha 1 is present in the radial muscle. So if there is alpha 1 stimulation, so there will be a contraction of the radial muscle, and that I causes the mydriasis. Now, if we block alpha 1, then what happens? The patient is taking some alpha 1 blocker. So what will be the effect? The mydriasis will not properly occur because the radial muscle will not be contracted because of that alpha 1 antagonist. And in case of bladder, we all know that why we need to block that alpha 1, because if we stimulate alpha 1 receptor, alpha 1 stimulation causes the internal sphincter contraction along with the prostatic contraction. So that will cause the narrowing of the urethra. If we block the alpha 1 receptor, then it will be dilated, and the prostate also, that which was contracted, will be relaxed. So there will be a proper passage of urine from bladder to urethra. Now, if we are using this alpha 1 receptor blocker in the patients who are going to cataract surgery, what will happen? So this is a picture. We can see the iris, and it has been stretched. If the proper mydriasis not happen, so there will be a problem in cataract surgery, and that is known as intraoperative floppy iris syndrome. So that means a poor preoperative pupil dilation. So a floppy iris with a propensity to billow and prolapse from the surgical wounds. There will be a progressive intraoperative meiosis because of that alpha 1 blockage, and there will be higher incidence of complications like posterior capsular rupture, vitreous loss, and iris trauma. So we need to assess this IFIS. Why? Because the 40 to 90% patients on tamsulosin, they develop this IFIS, and there is 2.3 times increased post-operative complication rate. And the important thing to note is that if I am deprescribed tamsulosin before surgery, so that will not prevent IFIS. So even stopping the drug like tamsulosin 1 year before surgery, that also not prevent the occurrence of IFIS. And only the 1 week use also can trigger this IFIS. So what is very important to note, that if we are recognize the ability of tamsulosin or other alpha 1 blockers that it can cause IFIS, that is a very important factor. This recognition is very important, which can improve the cataract surgery outcome. And it has been seen that when the surgeon is aware that yes, the patient has used tamsulosin, then the complication rate decreased from 12% to only 0.6%. And this is why the medication list is very important, and whether the patient is on alpha 1 antagonist, that is very important why patient is chosen for cataract surgery. So this line is very important. When offered alpha 1 antagonist treatment, men should be asked if cataract surgery is planned, and therapy should be delayed until the procedure is completed. If we know that yes, the patient requires cataract surgery, so we can delay the initiation of alpha 1 blocker maybe for few months, 1 month or 2 months like that. the patient will undergo the cataract surgery. Then we can start, after having the cataract surgery, we can start the alpha-1 blocker. So another case, a 64-year male, diabetes, BHP, hypertension. This is the medication list: glimepiride, metformin BD, dildagliptin 50 BD, amlodipine, telmisartan, chlorthalidone, atorvastatin, aspirin, and paroxetine. Now, the patient had visited neurosurgery OPD, and it was prescribed there the fixed dose combination of glutasoride plus tamsulosin. So what happened? Third day of OPD visit, that neurosurgery OPD visit, at 2 a.m., the patient suffered sudden onset chest pain, palpitation, blackout, and fall in the room while going to bathroom, and then admitted in hospital. So what happened? Everyone think that, okay, so the medicine is responsible, which was that just started 3 days back. But it is also important to note this particular patient was taking over-the-counter sildenafil 50 milligram, and at that day when he was admitted, he took that sildenafil. And what is sildenafil? We all know this is a phosphodiesterase inhibitor, and it causes rise in the cyclic GMP, which cause vasodilation. Along with, though the tamsulosin has very less selectivity in the alpha-1 B type subtype of alpha-1 receptor, but it also causes vasodilation. So there is in the terms of adverse event, the vasodilation, there is a synergism between these two, and the patient has some vasodilation induced hypotension, and that may cause palpitation and other issues. But what happened in the hospital? It was found that another important issue, you can see in this picture, the patient has tinea crudis extensive, and for that the patient was on itraconazole. Again, from separate dermatology OPD, he was taking itraconazole in the doses of 200 milligram per day. And we all know that itraconazole is a CYP3A4 inhibitor. And if a CYP3A4 inhibitor is used along with alpha-1 antagonist, the concentration of the alpha-1 antagonist will be more in the blood, and there will be more chance of adverse effects from the alpha-1 antagonist like tamsulosin also. So this drug history was missed, and we need to take care of this drug history carefully. And another important issue is that tamsulosin is extensively metabolized not only by CYP3A4 but also by CYP2D6. And now I just want to go back to the previous slide, and I want to focus on this drug paroxetine, SSRI. Paroxetine inhibits CYP2D6, and that is why there is more accumulation of tamsulosin in the blood. Along with that, if we go by the sildenafil metabolism, that also predominantly by CYP3A4. So itraconazole not only increase the level of tamsulosin but also increase the level of sildenafil, and the synergistic effect of this tamsulosin and sildenafil producing vasodilation is more here due to this increased availability in the blood. Along with that, as the patient is taking paroxetine, it inhibits the CYP2D6. It aggravates or it increases more the concentration of tamsulosin because of that lesser metabolism of tamsulosin, and the patient has this type of atrocity. So this is very important. The medication list is very important. Medication history is very important, and that is why the principles of clinical pharmacology can optimize by identifying the ways to reduce the polypharmacy, specifically in elderly. Reduce the dose of potentially inappropriate medications in older patients. Avoid drug-drug and drug disease interactions. Adjust dose of renal and hepatic impairment. Avoid therapeutic duplication and avoiding the prescribing cascade. And we need to enhance medication adherence by simplifying the regimen. Maybe the pill organizers and drug calendars can be helpful. These round-back checkups are very important. We need to check what are the medicine the patient is taking, and we need to educate older adults on how to safe and effectively take medications, because this informed prescribing is very important. And we all know we prescriber and the patient are connected by this prescription. It is very important to acknowledge that prescribing is a risky behavior. And what is rational therapeutics? Rational therapeutics means the balancing perfectly between benefits and risk. With that, I just want to thank you all. If there is any question or comment, then we will have some more discussion. Thank you.